Welcome to part 2 of our series about demystifying strategic planning. In today's episode, we're talking about how to establish the starting point to begin your planning. Ron talks about his true feelings for Simon Sinek, and we ask the question, why is there only one oyster vending machine in South Australia? Well, welcome to the Business Builders Podcast. I'm Brenton Gowland.
And I'm Ron Tolian.
And Ron, we're very lucky because last time we did a podcast, you said that we might need to do an obituary for you or an epitaph because you were going shark diving, but you're here. You survived.
Yeah. I was shark cage diving, a very important differentiation between shark diving and shark cage diving, and no limbs lost. So I'm a happy man.
We're happy to still have you because we wouldn't have wanted to have anyone else have to come and take over, even someone as lovely as Gordon Edwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gordon, you can look for somewhere else to do your podcast.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're going, who are these guys talking about? Gordon is a mentor in our circles who coaches a lot of people in business, and he's a great guy. But that's beside the point.
Funnily enough, over in Port Lincoln at the moment.
Is he? So You're all like doing just a wind through, everyone going shark diving one at a time.
I don't think he is. I think the most adventurous thing is going out to the oyster farms.
Okay, but okay. They're great oysters.
Oh, fantastic. And now in Coffin Bay, there's a oyster vending machine. Just calling out to anyone who is desperate for oysters, there's an oyster vending machine, but you have to go to Coffin Bay to get them.
There's only one oyster vending machine in South Australia.
Yeah, in Coffin Bay.
Okay, well, that would actually be fairly popular in other locations too, I think.
Oh, well, I think they're trying it out and seeing if it's a goer.
I reckon it'd work.
It was working on that day. I picked up a couple of dozen.
Anyway, we digress. Okay, so just recapping, on our last episode, Ron, we started a series on demystifying strategic planning. Can you give us a bit of a summary, just for those people who are listening? What were the 5 questions that you need to consider when you're looking at strategic planning?
If you're thinking about your organization and where it's going, the 4 questions that you really need to be able to answer, I should say, are where's the organization now? Where do we want to be in the future? How are we going to get there? How will we know when we've arrived? And one that's, as a result of the Simon Sinek's, why are we even doing this in the first place?
Correct. So if you want to get the full synopsis on that, we recommend that you listen to the last episode, which is Demystifying Strategic Planning. And really, that'll give you a foundation for today's episode as well. But before we get into it, we need to mention our sponsors, Ron.
Yes, we do.
So firstly, we've got Borough Markets. So they've given us space for this great studio that we're talking to you from. And Borough Markets are a digital marketing agency that basically help you get to everyone that you want to get to on whatever device they're on through using artificial intelligence to help you market your business better. So they're very much worth looking at. So look at www.boroughmarkets.com.au, and that's spelled BOROUGH markets.com.au. Who else have we got, Ron?
We've got Adaptco. You can talk about Adaptco because that's you.
Well, Adaptco is me, and it's starting to find its shape. And funnily enough, what Adaptco helps businesses do is find their shape, usually through sales and marketing strategic help. And then that usually turns into some sort of strategic planning, which is what we're talking about today. And then we help people execute that. So I will go into a business and help them develop their strategic plan, and then I will help them execute it. That is basically what Adaptco is doing at the moment, and slowly collecting a few people along the sides that are helping with these services.
Fantastic.
The other one is SA Business Builders. Now, that is a network of business professionals here in Adelaide where we focus on building quality relationships. And we will be starting to talk about when those events are going to be happening in the next few weeks, because we're going to be starting the planning for SA Business Builders events soon.
And we're out of the doldrums of COVID, so hopefully we'll be doing that in the next couple of weeks, or starting to plan the next one in the next couple of weeks. That's fantastic.
It is good because all the restrictions are starting to ease. I think all the venues are back to 75% capacity, which is a great thing.
Fantastic.
Indeed. So, now getting on to the episode, we are here today to talk about question number 1, which is...
Where are we now?
And last time we spoke, we gave the analogy of a map. So when you need to take a journey, and strategic planning is really like planning how you're going to take the journey. If you want to start from point A to get to point B, you need to know where you are. You need to know where point A is, firstly, so that you can start to plan your journey. And so today we're talking about how to work out where you are as a business. And Ron, I'm going to put this to you. What things should we be thinking about to actually understand where we're at as a business right now?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is a lot of people like to think they already know where they are. And it's a bad assumption to make, because the whole process of going through determining where you are is a series of questions. And unless you are asking those questions and actively trying to answer them, you really don't have a very good idea of where you are. And what I'm talking about is, where are we in the big wide world? So it's what I call the macro environment, things that are going to affect us from outside that we have no control over. Where are we in terms of our industry and the things that, our competitors and our customers and all those things that directly affect our business on a day-to-day basis? And then finally, where are we internally? And that means, what are the resources of the organization? What are the capabilities of the organization? What are our processes? And systems and processes are often left out of the equation altogether. So it's about funneling information from the big wide world down to our specific situation in our business and looking at all of those aspects of what environments are we in, that we're able to answer the question, where are we now? So it's a structured approach.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, if we're a business and we want to sit down and start doing strategic planning, before we get to the planning part, we need to work out where we are. And to do that, we need to start asking a lot of questions about the business itself and about the environment the business works in, both locally, in our industry, and then, of course, internationally.
And sometimes things that are happening internationally won't have an effect on our business. We discount those. But it's worth considering. One of the methodologies that's used in terms of the macro environment is what's called a PESTEL analysis.
Yep.
And that's just an acronym for what's the political environment, what's the economic environment, what's the social environment, and in other words, what's happening to the demographics and so on of our customers and our competitors. What's the technological environment? How's that changing? What's the ecological or green environment, as opposed to environments in general? And what's the legal environment? How's that changing? All of those, that just gives you a framework for thinking about different aspects of the macro environment that we work within.
Well, we've seen some incredible examples of that recently. And if, sometimes you think these things don't affect us, depending on what your business is like. But COVID's kind of really brought a focus to the fact that, let's take the car industry, for example, getting supply is really difficult. So you're waiting 3 to 6 months for a vehicle. That really is going to impact how you do things. I bought a fridge recently. I've had to wait 1.5 months to get delivery of that because supply chain is affected. Then you've got a chip shortage all around the world and so forth, which is affecting both computers and cars and anything with technology. Then there's a whole number of factors that are really public at the moment. But then there's other factors around what's permeating the thinking of businesses at the moment, like the green and sustainability aspects and so forth. So what I would ask is, if you're a business, an SME, how would you actually determine what those factors are? How would you get that information?
Well, the first thing is to to ask yourself the questions. What's happening in the political environment that might affect us? What's happening in the economic environment? And as you quite rightly pointed out, these things are changing on a continual basis. So to say, look, every time I'm going to do my strategic plan, maybe once every 3 years or 5 years and so on, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to shut my eyes to all this stuff, is kind of crazy. You should be organizations should be doing environmental planning or environmental scanning, I should say, on a continual basis. And that means devoting some of your management time, management thinking to what's going on that's going to have an effect on us. And does this affect our strategic planning? Does this affect the way the organization is going to react to its environment? So that means it's probably something that should be on most people's agenda at least once a quarter.
Yeah, agreed.
So that they're starting to see, maybe you use a radar as an analogy, where you're starting to see some things happen way off on the edge of the radar. And as it gets closer to the organization, okay, we need to do something about this.
Yeah, correct.
So environmental scanning gives you the capacity to do that. And one way of achieving this is to have people on your executive team or your management team to take responsibility for one aspect of the PESTEL analysis. Let's say social, aging population. For some organizations, no effect. For other organizations, it has, like aged care, it has a massive impact. So what are the things that are going to affect our organization and what's happening in that particular domain that will have an impact on our thinking and our decision-making going forward?
So to work out macro, what I'm hearing is that we can get people from our executive to be responsible for different areas and for gleaning information and so forth. But we have to have our radar out. So in other words, we're scanning the news, we're scanning the media, we're listening to what's being said. And I'm sure we can also get reports, like there's IBIS reports, and what else is there?
Oh, there's industry association reports on various industries that you're involved in. There's information about your competitors. There's information from intelligence. Now, this is an area that's, I think, and we're getting into the micro area, but this is an area that I think is really badly done in organizations. And what I mean by that is this. We're all looking for intelligence on what's going on in our marketplace. And let's suppose I, as a dedicated employee, find out some good information, some good juicy information about one of our competitors. What do I do with it? And most organizations don't have a place or a person that I can go to and say, I've got some good information. And so oftentimes these things get lost, not because of negligence, but because people just don't know what to do with the information.
You bring up a good point. And you can build these things into just regular weekly meetings. Like let's say, for instance, you had a BD meeting or a operations meeting, but particularly BD, because the BD people are generally out in the market. You can basically have a part where you've got either client intelligence, like what's happening with our clients, and industry intelligence. What am I hearing when I go out to events and talking? But to your point, where do you record that? At very least, you would record it in meeting minutes. So it's so important to keep minutes of meetings. But then there needs to be some mechanism, and different businesses could do it differently, but simply someone recording those things and listing it somewhere and,
having a central depository of information that people feel comfortable when I put this information in, it's not going to be wasted.
And all it needs to be is a spreadsheet or even just a Word doc where you just keep adding to it, and you can, at the end of a quarter, you can start looking at those things. Might be short little paragraphs or whatever, but that information becomes so valuable over time, just small insights and so forth. But before we get too cracking into that, can you just explain the difference between the macro and the micro?
Okay, the macro environment is, as I said before, the big wide world that we operate in. And it consists of all the things that may affect the environments that we work within, like interest rates in the economic sector. Interest rates going up, interest rates going down. That might have an effect on our organization.
That's a macro.
That's a macroeconomic event, if you like.
Yep. So to learn about, where we are, we need to understand the macro, the much broader thing. So the global impacts.
Yeah. And, from an economic point of view, there's plenty of information out there from banks, from government about what expectations there are into the future that will affect our planning horizon.
And so then micro is our industry, our local geography, et cetera.
Yeah. The micro is more of where I operate or where my organization operates. It's about my customers, what's affecting them, what changes are they having, what are their preferences. And a lot of this can come from just talking to your own people who are at the coalface.
Yeah.
What are customers asking for? What are their complaints?
Well, that's what we were just talking about with, gathering intelligence, because it's then our staff become basically sensors or feelers out in the marketplace to actually determine what's going on. So we need to listen.
Exactly. We need to listen actively by actually listening to them, but having a mechanism where they can put this information into the system.
Now, Ron, this actually brings up an interesting point, because how long will it take to gather this information? Because most people, when they do strategic planning, they're like, right, we're going to do strategic planning. So they just kind of go, right, we're going to just jump into it. So let's understand, everyone tell us what you think. This sounds like it's going to take a lot of time.
And it's a process of environmental scanning, and it should be going on a continual basis. If you're, let's suppose for the sake of argument, you want to do your strategic planning with the board or with the owners next week, you don't start scrambling now for that information. It's looking at the repository of information you've been able to collect and being able to determine what are the salient things that we want to put on the table. If you start collecting that information a week beforehand and, give your subordinates a task to find the information on, what's going on in our marketplace, chances are you'll get rubbish information. And as you can appreciate, if you start with rubbish information,
rubbish in, rubbish out.
Yes. What's your strategic plan going to be based on?
This is really interesting because it sort of indicates that strategic planning is not just a one-stop shop. It's a constant activity.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that later on when we talk about how we revise the plan. And it's, I've seen some great strategic plans that might as well have been gold plated. And they make great doorstops because they're never used again. Strategic plan in its best format is it's an active document that is getting revised on a continual basis. It doesn't mean you keep changing direction. It means you keep changing or keep nuancing it according to the changes in the environment.
Okay, so we've covered macro pretty well. We've started to look at micro. So micro is our environment and our staff. And we've talked about, listening to our staff and hearing what they're perceiving out in the marketplace.
And don't forget the micro environment suppliers as well.
Well, I was just going to ask you, what else should we be talking about in the micro space?
All right, competitors, customers, suppliers, regulators, the government, media, anyone who can affect our industry. Michael Porter did a great analysis or developed a great tool called Porter's 5 Forces. You can use that as a basis for your thinking in this area. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of techniques and formats out there that people can use as a basis for doing this analysis. So don't start from scratch. Start from finding out the type of things that other people have used.
But us as a normal business operator, no matter where we are, we can start by asking questions and then listening to our staff, listening to what's going on, and then doing some research. For instance, you talked about suppliers. You can go around and interview suppliers.
Absolutely.
Find out what they think. How can I improve? All that kind of rich information that will actually be a good baseline for you.
People underestimate the fact that I have to go out and do market research. No, you don't. I'm not saying market research isn't important, quite the opposite. But you can do some of this work yourself, and you should be doing some of it to stay in touch with your customers.
Like anything, if you get into the habit of doing it, it becomes easier and easier and easier and more valuable. So we've covered off on macro. We've talked about micro. Let's talk about internal, because these are the 3 areas that help us determine where we are on the map, right?
Yep, that's right. And that's looking at the resources that you've got. And we're talking there about capital resources. We're talking about human resources. We're talking about systems and processes that you have within the organization. We're talking about the type of things that allow you to operate in your marketplace. So what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses? And we'll get to the typical SWOT analysis later on, but it's important that you understand, if I'm looking to do something in the future, do I have the capabilities to do it? And if I don't, what do I need to get to be able to do it?
Sure.
So that's what you're trying to do now. What is my situation internally? And it comes down to things like culture and values. And people go, oh, this is all wishy-washy stuff, but it's really critical and important. What are the attitudes of your people? What is the culture that you have? And just as importantly, why are you doing this?
Well, it's like back to that map analogy. If we understand what the culture is now and we know that we need to move that, we need to understand where we are to then be able to shift it to the next place, right? What are the rules? What are the thinking habits we need to break? How are we going to go about that? So it's vitally important that we understand all of those things, particularly what the culture is in the business. So it is very valuable.
Because don't forget, this is how we're going to engage with the environment into the future. We need to understand what we're good at, what we're not good at.
So back to the question, how do we go about finding this information, Ron? We're a small business owner or a medium-sized business owner, and we need to find this information. How?
Well, the internal analysis is done within your organization. So it's about you making judgment calls on, do we have the capabilities? So it's doing things like understanding what skills your people have, what knowledge they have, what skills do we have.
So that's a HR kind of
absolutely.
activity?
I mean, this is where the HR department comes, for those organizations that have one, comes into its own, into being able to, what information do you have about our people that allows us to make an assessment of what resources, human resources we have, what capabilities we have, looking at your systems. And this is an area that's often completely disregarded in strategic planning. What systems do I have? And I'm not talking about IT alone. I'm talking about what systems do we have for engaging with our customers? What systems do we have for meeting their needs? So this is the critical business systems of the organization and the support systems that allow you to operate an organization. Like your planning, like your financial management, like human resources. So all of this, and there's nothing new about any of this. This is all the same concepts that are used in quality systems or business excellence systems. So again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You need to understand what are the processes that we have in our organization, and what are we doing to improve those processes over time? Do we have a system for improving the processes within our system? And if you don't, you need to develop one. But that's part of your strategic plan.
Yeah.
We need to get capability in this area.
And look, the other thing that I think you should really, as a business, look at is actually talking to your staff, because I find that if you interview the staff, you'll be really surprised at what comes out, and that helps create a baseline. It helps answer questions about culture, etc. And I find 3 questions are really good to ask your staff is, what do you see in the future? Where do you think we can be in 5 years? What's your personal vision for the company? And that's very interesting, because you can start to tell, where people are at, and maybe different roles within the company. You wouldn't necessarily do this, but certainly with your management team and maybe the next rung down, if you ask them what they see the challenges that you're facing are, that you'll get a fair bit of information, but then also what solutions do they see? And that starts to give some information again about baselining, because what we're talking about with finding out where you are is creating a baseline. And the other really practical stuff that comes down to the finance department, like you were talking before, is where is our income coming from? And analyzing what services are making the most money in my organization. What are the key industries that we're making the most money from? Because once we understand those things, they can actually really help us make decisions about, well, maybe we should be focusing on this or this or this.
And certainly looking at trends within your organization.
Yes.
And trends within your financial information and customer information to see what are the things that are becoming more popular and what are the things that are tending to fall off.
So when we're looking, and kind of what I've surmised about what we're talking about in terms of looking at internal, we're talking about finance. So where the money's coming from, what's happening, et cetera, what industries.
How am I funding myself into the future?
Yeah. So the finance parts, the HR part, and HR could really, include culture and so forth. It's the sales, what's going out in the marketplace. Is there anything else from an internal perspective that we've missed?
Processes. What processes do I have? And I've talked about that. It's really critical that you think about the processes that your organization has and what capability you have for improving those processes. Because if we deliver services and products to customers every day.
Yes.
And we do that on a routine basis. It's something we do over and over again. People are great at looking at projects. There's great knowledge in project management out there. Just about every manager has done some type of project management as part of their training or as part of their university studies or whatever. But very few people focus on process management, and yet 90%, probably 95% of what we do every day is processes. So if we're not improving those processes, what are we doing to make ourselves more competitive in the marketplace?
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so we've looked at macro, we've looked at micro, and we've looked at internal. Mm-hmm. So how do we start summing this all up to put it into a format that's usable for strategic planning?
Well, I think in my experience, there's plenty of mechanisms that you can use, critical success factors. One thing that I've found useful is after you've done all this analysis, asking the question, so what? And putting it into a framework. And the framework I like to use is the SWOT analysis.
Okay, tried and true, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
But it's really critical to understand why the SWOT analysis is usually a 2x2 matrix. Because if you look at the top line of the SWOT analysis, it's strengths and weaknesses. Bottom line is opportunities and threats. So it cuts down to things above the line are internal to the organization. That means we have control over them. There are strengths, positive, and there are weaknesses, negative. So there's things that we are really good at and things that we need to improve on. Below the line is outside the organization. We have no control over this, but it might be something that we can do, or it might be something that's going to come and bite us in the bum. Again, positives and negatives. So what's really important in the SWOT analysis is that when we get to the opportunities area, we understand, and it's unfortunate part of the English language, we use opportunity for, I have an opportunity to do something. Yes, you do. But what is it that gives you the to-do bit? That is the opportunity. So it's outside our control. So for the sake of argument, there's more demand for our products and services. That's an opportunity. We have no control over it, but we can do something about it.
Sure.
What we do about it is something else again. But it's the opportunity to do something about it. Just like threats. We can't control the threats, but we can do something about them later on. But we have to identify what those threats are, things that could hurt our organization.
Okay. So in recap, we're talking about the fact that working out where you are and doing that analysis is pretty much a constant thing. It's like having a radar in place, as we were talking about earlier, and creating avenues to collect the information, maybe whether it's on a weekly, a monthly, or a quarterly basis, that can then potentially be fed into some sort of framework like a SWOT analysis, like you were just talking about, that can then be incredibly usable when it comes to doing strategic planning. Because let's face it, if we know exactly where we are on the map, for instance, we were talking about the finance factor earlier, and if we learn that bulk of our income is coming from one area and another area is not necessarily providing it, it's either do we focus on that area and grow it, or is it more beneficial for the company to focus on what's working and get rid of what's there?
And you've just hit the nail on the head. It's all about, where do I want to focus? So I've seen SWOT analysis with 20 items in each of the 4 quadrants. How useful is that in terms of helping you sort the wheat from the chaff, in terms of what's important and what's not? Really, I like to say 3 or 4 things in each one of those quadrants. It's the really big ticket items. What's really important in terms of what we're capable of doing? Just because we like each other, that's a strength, fantastic. But is it going to be relevant to our thinking about planning? Probably not. But if we have information and capability that no one else has, and then we can leverage that, that's critical. So that should go on your strengths.
Fair enough.
And same with opportunities.
So that's where the work comes in, really, is taking all that information and then distilling it down into something that's usable and something that's meaningful. And I always remember that saying, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. So that first part of strategic planning should really be distilling all the information that you've got from what's going on in your environment, what's going on within your business, what's going on within your staff, and turning that into something usable. That's the work.
Because it's a basis for your decision making. And you don't want to have too much information, that you're considering when you're making big decisions about where the organization's going.
Okay. Well, look, everyone, we hope you've found that useful. That's a really good summary, I think, of where we are on the map right now. Remember, the 4 questions were, where are we now? Where are we wanting to go? How are we going to get there? And how will we know when we've arrived? And then, of course, the Simon Sinek. Gosh, we're giving him such a plug.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's kind of pluggable, really.
I don't know that that's the right thing to say, but
maybe you should cut that out.
Fair enough. But that last question, the +1, is, why am I doing this anyway?
Yeah. And what's really important in that is the why is not for money. It's what motivates us to do this. What do we believe?
And that comes back to the cultural question, right? Because I'm doing strategic planning with a business at the moment, and we just looked at the vision and the mission, and now we're looking at the values. And it really, you see the inspiration that people get by finding the right vision. It actually motivates them to actually go in a direction and actually, wow, I know why I'm part of this company.
And look, quite frankly, I don't know if we have enough time to do this next time, but you could do an entire podcast on values. I
think we'll leave that as a separate point. Maybe we'll do that after this series, and we got a couple of people to interview. So the next one in our series, Ron, is going to be,
where do we want to go?
Where do we want to go? So we will look forward to seeing you again. Just a quick reminder of our sponsors. They are Borough Markets, www.boroughmarkets.com.au, Adaptco, and SA Business Builders. Okay, and we will see you next time. And until then, it's bye from me.
And bye from me.